I didn't cry when I read the text. I just set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a second, listening to the hum of my refrigerator. That was it. That was how 31 years of being someone's daughter ended. The text was from my stepmother, not my father, my stepmother, which told me everything I needed to know about who was actually making decisions in that house. We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year, just immediate family, you understand. I understood. I'd been understanding my whole life. My name is Zoe. I'm 32 years old. I'm a software engineer, and 3 years ago, I sold a data privacy tool I'd been building in my apartment for 18 months to a fintech company based in Austin for $2.3 million. I paid off my student loans the same afternoon the wire hit. I bought a small house in Denver. I put the rest in a combination of index funds and a real estate investment I'm still very pleased about. My father does not know about any of this. I kept it that way on purpose. Here's the thing about growing up the way I did. You learn very early that information is currency. And you learn even earlier not to leave your currency lying around where certain people can reach it. My father, Richard, remarried when I was 9 years old. My mother had died the year before, ovarian cancer, fast and brutal. And I think the grief broke something in him that never quite healed right. He met my stepmother, Carolyn, at a grief support group, which would be a beautiful story if Carolyn were a different kind of person. She's not a bad person exactly. She's just someone who loves my father and doesn't particularly like the evidence that he existed before her. That evidence being me. Her daughter, Priya, Carolyn, adopted her as a single mother before she met my dad, became the daughter my father poured everything into. I watched it happen in slow motion over about 4 years. The recitals he remembered to attend, the ones he forgot, the college savings account he opened for Priya when she turned 13, the one he never opened for me because, as he explained it once with genuine confusion on his face, I seemed fine. I was fine. I worked 3 part-time jobs through college. I took out loans. I was spectacularly, aggressively, exhaustingly fine. After I graduated, first in my family to do so, not that anyone threw a party, I got a junior developer role at a startup in Denver and started working on my own project in the evenings. I didn't tell my father what I was building. He'd never asked much about my work anyway. When I called home, Carolyn answered, updated me on Priya's life, and then said Richard was busy. Could she take a message? I moved home once after college for about 4 months when the startup I was working for did a first round of layoffs. I slept in what had been converted into a sewing room. Carolyn was polite about it, the way hotels are polite, efficient, not warm. My father seemed vaguely surprised every morning to find me at the breakfast table, like he kept forgetting I was there. I left as soon as I could afford to. The years that followed were fine. That word again? I visited for major holidays and birthdays. I sent gifts. I called on Father's Day. I did everything the books say you're supposed to do to maintain a relationship with a difficult parent. I told myself it was working. Then I sold the company. I didn't tell them. I know that sounds strange. Most people, when something that significant happens, call their family. I thought about it. I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand the afternoon the deal closed, and I thought, who would I be calling? Really? I'd be calling to share something I built entirely alone, something they had never asked about, and I'd be listening to Carolyn update me on Priya's new job before handing the phone to my father, who would say, "That's great, sweetie," in the tone he used when he wanted to wrap up a conversation. So I didn't call. I bought my house, I invested, I kept showing up for holidays. For about 2 more years. The Thanksgiving text arrived on a Tuesday in October. I read it 3 times. Just immediate family, you understand. I knew Priya would be there. I knew Priya's boyfriend would be there. I knew Priya's boyfriend would be there. I knew Priya's boyfriend's parents, who Carolyn had apparently become very close with, would be there. The table would be full, just not with me. I sat down on my kitchen floor, which I know sounds dramatic, but sometimes your body just decides it's done standing. I thought about every Thanksgiving I'd sat at that table and felt like a guest. I thought about the year Carolyn rearranged the seating so I was next to the Coates. I thought about my father carving the turkey and telling a long story about a Thanksgiving from when he and Carolyn first started dating, a memory that existed entirely without me in it, and laughing at the punchline while I passed the rolls. I sat on my kitchen floor for maybe 15 minutes. Then I got up, opened my laptop, and started making some calls of my own. I have a college friend named Jess who I've kept up with through everything. She's an event planner in Phoenix, genuinely one of the most competent humans I've ever met. I also have a neighbor from my old apartment building, a retired high school art teacher named Mr. Tears Okafor, who has been like a substitute grandfather to me since I was 24 and needed someone to help me move a bookshelf, and ended up staying for dinner and coming back every Sunday for 4 years. His wife Gloria makes sweet potato pie that I've compared directly to a religious experience. I have my mother's younger sister, Aunt Patricia. Wait, no, I mean Aunt Diane. My mother's sister Diane, who I see twice a year and who still has my mother's eyes and who, at every single family gathering with my father's side, is conspicuously, pointedly not invited. I have my college roommate Becca, who drove 8 hours straight when I called her after my mom died, even though she'd only known me for 6 weeks at the time. I have my mentor from my first job, a woman named Dr. Sato, who taught me more about writing clean code and negotiating salary than any course I ever took. I have 4 coworkers from the startup who got laid off the same week I did and who I've stayed close with through everything since. I made a list. 17 people. People who had shown up for me when they didn't have to. People who had sat with me in quiet rooms and loud ones. People who were not on my father's Thanksgiving guest list because they had never been the right kind of family. Then I looked at my real estate portfolio and made a different kind of call. I own a 4-bedroom vacation property in Asheville, North Carolina. I bought it 18 months ago as an investment. I rent it out on the short-term market. It does well, and I love Asheville. I called the property manager and blocked out the entire week of Thanksgiving. Then I called Jess. I need to host Thanksgiving, I said. 17 people. Asheville. Full catering, the good stuff. Whatever the rental market in Western North Carolina thinks is peak season, I don't care. Jess was quiet for a second. Is this a revenge thing or a healing thing? I thought about it. Both, I said. I think it might be both. I send you a budget by tomorrow morning, she said. Also, I'm coming. I'm putting myself on the list. 18 people. I sent the invitations that night. Not a group text, individual messages, written personally to each person. I told them I'd been excluded from my family's Thanksgiving. I told them I was hosting my own at my house in Asheville, and that I wanted them there. Flights covered if they needed it. Full house. I meant it. 14 people said yes within 24 hours. 3 needed a few more days to sort out logistics and then said yes. 18 out of 18. I want to pause here and say something about what that felt like because I think it matters. When my stepmother's text arrived, I read it and felt, underneath the hurt and the old familiar ache of it, something that I recognized as embarrassment. Like I'd been caught wanting something I shouldn't want. Like needing to belong somewhere was a weakness I should have outgrown. 14 people saying yes in 24 hours felt like an answer to a question I'd been too afraid to ask out loud. I didn't call my family what I was doing. I didn't post anything on social media before the trip. I just packed, drove Aunt Diane to Denver International, and flew to Asheville with my whole chest full of something I hadn't felt in a long time. What I felt like was rich. Not in the way that has anything to do with money. The house is a converted farmhouse, which sounds quaint until you're inside it. 3 stories, wraparound porch, mountain views in every direction, a kitchen big enough to hold 8 people cooking at once. Jess arrived the day before everyone else and had the place looking like a spread from a magazine before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Mr. Okafor and Gloria drove up from their daughter's place in Charlotte. Becca flew in from Seattle. Dr. Foreign from Seattle. Sato Joe from Raleigh with her husband and brought 2 bottles of wine she described as celebratory for no reason and every reason. Thanksgiving itself was I don't actually have the right words for it. I've been trying to find them for weeks now, and I keep landing on full. The house was full. The table. We'd set up 2 long tables on the back porch because the dining room wasn't big enough. Was full of food that Jess had sourced from 3 local farms and one very serious caterer who clearly considered himself an artist. Mr. Okafor gave a toast that made 4 people cry. Gloria's sweet potato pie was, as always, transcendent. Becca and Dr. Sato got into a spirited argument about a TV show that had apparently been the center of controversy in 2 separate friend groups, and I watched them gesturing wildly at each other and thought, this is family. This is exactly what that word is supposed to mean. I posted photos that evening. I don't post often. My Instagram is quiet, mostly landscapes and the occasional picture of my coffee, but I posted that night. The long tables with the mountain view behind them, 18 faces, most of them mid-loft, the pie. The porch lights. I wrote a short caption, grateful for the people who chose to be here. I wasn't targeting anyone. I want to be clear about that. I posted because I was genuinely happy and I wanted to document it. I didn't tag my father. I didn't tag my stepmother. I didn't tag Priya. The post was public because I never changed that setting years ago, and it simply hadn't occurred to me to change it now. My phone started making noise around 9:30. Not notifications. Jess and I were cleaning up the kitchen, and I had my phone face up on the counter because I'd been playing music through it, and I watched the screen light up and stay lit. It vibrated against the marble. It vibrated again. Jess looked at it, looked at me, and raised an eyebrow. I picked it up. Priya's account had started following me on Instagram 3 months ago, which I'd noticed and set aside without thinking much about it. Priya had seen the post. Priya had sent a screenshot to Carolyn. That much became clear from the first text, which was from my father's number, at 9:43 at night, which was the first time my father had texted me directly in a very long time. We need to talk. Then one from Carolyn's number. Zoe, that post is very hurtful and I think you need to think about the message you're sending. Then another from my father. Who paid for all of that? How did you afford a house in Asheville? I set the phone back down. Mr. Okafor was drying a pot by the sink. He saw my face. He didn't ask questions. He just put the pot down, walked over, and put one hand briefly on my shoulder in the way he does when he's communicating something that doesn't need words. I picked the phone back up. By 10 o'clock, there were 26 messages. By 10:30, there were 38. Priya had apparently called my father's house and spoken to Carolyn at some length, because a long text arrived from Carolyn around 11 that seemed to have been written in some heat and then partially revised, which made for disorienting reading. The substance of it was, I had embarrassed the family. I was flaunting. The house, my investment property that I had purchased with my own money from a company I had built, was apparently a point of significant grievance because no one had known it existed, which felt, to Carolyn, like I had been keeping secrets. I had been keeping secrets. That's correct. I'd been keeping the secret of my own life from people who had demonstrated repeatedly that they would use information about my life as leverage rather than as connection. My father called at 11:14. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 11:20. I listened to both voicemails in the bathroom with the door closed. The first one was short. Zoe, call me back. The second one was longer. He said he didn't understand what I was doing or why I felt the need to make a statement. He said it seemed like I was trying to start something. He said Carolyn was very upset. Then, near the end, his voice changed in a way that I hadn't expected. Got quieter, less certain, and he said, I didn't know you had a house. I didn't know any of that. Why didn't you tell me? I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time after that. In the morning, I had 41 missed calls and a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Priya, who had apparently gotten my number from my father's phone. Her message was calm, which surprised me. She said she thought I was being passive-aggressive. She said she'd always known things were weird between us and she thought maybe we should talk. She said, and I played this part twice. I don't actually know why you were excluded from Thanksgiving. No one told me it was a decision. I thought you just weren't coming. I stood in the kitchen of my farmhouse in the early morning light, listening to that, and I felt something complicated shift in my chest. Becca made coffee. Outside, the mountains were doing that thing they do in November in Asheville, where the light comes in at an angle that makes everything look like it was painted. I could hear Mr. Okafor on the porch, on the phone with his daughter, laughing about something. I called my father back. He answered on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake. It was 6:50 in the morning. We talked for a long time. I won't reconstruct all of it because some of it is private in a way I want to keep private, and some of it was just two people talking around the edges of things they should have said to each other years ago. But I'll tell you what I did say, clearly and without softening it because I've been waiting most of my adult life to say it in a way he might actually hear. I told him about the company, all of it, the 18 months of building, the sleepless weekends, the deal, the number. I told him about the house in Denver. I told him about this house. I told him I hadn't shared any of it because I didn't trust that he would respond to my success, the way a father is supposed to respond to his child's success, and that distrust had been earned over a very long time. He was quiet for almost a full minute. Then he said, "I think I've made some mistakes." Which is not an apology, I want to be clear about that. 4 words is not an apology for 23 years. But it was, and I've thought about this a lot since. The first time he'd said anything that sounded like accountability. The first time he hadn't immediately pivoted to Carolyn's feelings or the concept of family harmony or what I should understand. I told him I needed him to think about what those mistakes actually were before we talked again. I told him I wasn't angry. I said that mostly calmly and mostly meant it. I told him I'd had a genuinely good Thanksgiving, the first one in years that felt real and that I'd needed it, and I wasn't apologizing for it. He said he understood. I didn't cry when I got the text. I'm not operating on hope. I learned a long time ago that hope, when it comes to my father, needs to be small and specific rather than large and open-ended. I'm waiting to see what he does rather than what he says. That's the thing about people who have let you down consistently. The bar is no longer words. The bar is actions, sustained over time, that demonstrate they understood the conversation they just had. What I do know is this. Carolyn texted me 2 days after Thanksgiving to say that she thought I owed her an apology for embarrassing the family. I read the text, set my phone down, and continued the hike I'd been on. The mountains were extraordinary. The light through the bare trees made long gold stripes on the path. My Aunt Diane was walking next to me, and she linked her arm through mine the way my mother used to, and neither of us said anything for a long time. And that silence was the most comfortable I'd felt in years. I didn't cry when I got phoned and in a panic. I didn't even have put my phone down dramatically on. I'm not carrying this story around as something I'm proud of exactly, or as a wound, or as a victory. It's more complicated than any of those. What I did on Thanksgiving was grieve something, the family I should have had, the father I needed him to be, and build something at the same time. Those two things happened together in the same house, at the same table, under the same porch lights. The post is still up. I've had strangers comment on it who seem to understand something about it that I didn't fully anticipate when I pressed publish. People who've sat at tables where they felt like guests. People who've built their own families from the people who chose to show up. People who know exactly what it costs to stop auditioning for love you should have been given without conditions. I didn't have a tidy ending to offer. My father and I are in an early, cautious, probably fragile version of something. Priya and I have texted 3 times, which is more than we have in the last 5 years combined, and I don't know what that becomes. Carolyn remains Carolyn. But 18 people sat around those 2 long tables on a November evening in the mountains, and every single one of them was there because they wanted to be. Because I'd asked, and they'd said yes. Because that's what it looks like when belonging isn't an accident of biology but a choice people make over and over. I watched to the edge of the porch after everyone had gone to bed that night, and I looked out at the mountains in the dark. You can't see them exactly, but you can feel where they are, the shape of the absence of stars at the horizon. And I thought about my mother, which I do often and quietly. And I thought about how many Thanksgivings she'd been excluded from in her own way, how she'd spent years trying to take up exactly the right amount of space in rooms that had already been arranged without her in mind. She didn't get to build this. She didn't get to sit at that table. I sat at it for both of us. There's something I keep coming back to weeks after that Thanksgiving. It's not the phone lighting up on the counter. It's not the 41 missed calls. It's the moment Mr. calls. Okafor put his hand on my shoulder without saying a word, and how that one gesture contained more fatherhood than most of what I'd been chasing for 32 years. I used to think the way my father treated me was something I could fix if I was just good enough at it. Patient enough. Forgiving enough. I stayed small in rooms that had been arranged without me in mind. I answered when Carolyn picked up and told me about Priya's life. I sent the gifts and made the calls and showed up over and over to a table where I was seated next to the Coates. I thought persistence was the same thing as earning something. I was wrong about that. What I've learned, not from a book, from actual years of living it, is that character is what you do with the hand you're dealt, not the hand itself. I was handed a father who grieved badly and a stepmother who needed me invisible and a childhood that required me to be, as I kept putting it, fine. What I did with that was build. I built skills. I built the company. I built the farmhouse investment. I built friendships with people like Becca and Dr. Sato and Mr. Okafor, people who saw me clearly and chose to stay anyway. None of that happened by accident. It happened because I decided very early that if the people who were supposed to hand me a foundation weren't going to, I would pour one myself. That's not stubbornness. It's something quieter and more deliberate than that. It's understanding that your circumstances explain you, but they don't have to define you, and then doing the daily, unglamorous work of making that true. The smarter I got about money and code and business, the more I understood something that took longer to apply to my personal life. You cannot negotiate with someone who benefits from your uncertainty. My father's version of our relationship required me to need him more than I did. The moment I stopped needing him, the moment he found out about the company, the house, the life I'd built entirely without his input, the dynamic cracked open. That's not me being cold. That's cause and effect. The power in that relationship had always been constructed on the assumption that I was the dependent one. I just quietly stopped being dependent and the assumption collapsed on its own. What I didn't expect was that Priya would call, that her voicemail would be calm, that she'd say she didn't know I'd been excluded, that no one told her it was a decision. That one detail rearranged something in me, because it meant that even inside a family shaped by Carolyn's anxieties and my father's avoidance, there was a person who might actually want something different if she understood what was real. I'm not naive about it. I'm not rushing toward a reconciliation that hasn't been earned, but I'm keeping the door exactly as open as it deserves to be, based on what people actually do next. Aunt Diane linked her arm through mine on that mountain trail the morning after, and I thought about my mother who spent years trying to take up exactly the right amount of space in rooms where she'd already been written out. She didn't get to build a table like the one I built. She didn't get to sit at it. I sat at it for both of us. That felt like the most honest thing I've ever done.